Greetings and salutations and welcome to a video about this Sharp DX-670 CD player. This machine was built in July of 1988. To put that in perspective, I was 17. I was doing an internship in Kentucky for the radio broadcast classes I was taking at that time. It was a good year. I remember it well. Anyhow, this machine popped up on eBay a few days ago, and I could not resist it. Sharp is a brand that is still around. As a matter of fact, I have a big 4K 55-inch TV made by Sharp that I bought just last year. But back in the 80s, they were actually making some pretty nifty stereo components. They kind of got away from that as we got into the 90s and they started building things like boom boxes and all-in-one stereos and things like that. But they build all kinds of electronics, radios, microwaves, you name it. Sharp's got their name on it. And back in those days, they built some very interesting gear, that was for sure. And they were going for a budget market. But what they did is they kind of skipped a bunch of extra features that were popping up on CD players of the time, so that they could concentrate on giving you a really good CD transport and a very good sounding DAC and output amplifiers. So it's a simple machine that sounds really, really good. And it's a little bit weird. I have looked this thing up online, and I was able to determine that Sharp at that time was building their own transports for their CD players and their own logic as well, but they weren't building their own DAC, and so they have different suppliers listed. I couldn't find a direct definitive spec for this machine, but like the 650 says, is that it's a one chip, and it's a 16-bit linear chip. And one of the things about the 650 that was noted in a review I found from Hi-Fi magazine at that time was that it did exhibit some phase error in the channels, because in those days those monolithic chips were handling both right and left channels. On a CD, the data is actually laid out with a chunk of the left first, then the right, then the left, then the right, and it kind of switches. And the DAC is then supposed to figure all that out and route it in the right direction. So it was a few years later down the road that they came up with the idea of having two separate DACs, one for each channel. They would break that data out of the stream and send it to each, and that was a big selling point, probably about 2 or 3 years down the road from this. We're talking early 90s. And of course, these days we don't even think about that sort of thing. But back in the 80s, that phase error was an issue, but it wasn't anything you could really hear. Most tape recorders don't even, like the best in the world, don't have perfect phase. And I remember reading one article at the time that said the kind of phase error that you get from one of these kind of DACs is about the same as sitting 10 feet away from a pair of speakers and having one speaker be 1 inch back. So yeah, not anything really to worry about. But it does sometimes play into fooling your ears into thinking things are going on that aren't. Like when I first started listening to this machine, I was really blown away by the stereo. It may be that there is a slight phase error, and if you get that between your ears, your brain thinks, oh, that's a real wide stereo image. But anyway, it's a damn good sounding machine. This came to me refurbished from a seller called Sneakers Ruined My Life on eBay, and he refurbishes everything he sells, and he puts a little piece of tape over the top so that you can't get into it during the 30 days, just to make sure that you don't mess something up or send him old junk back. So I have not opened this thing up to actually look at what DAC is in it. I cannot find a lot of direct information about it, so what I know about it has just been from playing with it. So let's go ahead and take a tour. Over here you've got the typical power switch. There's no headphone jack on this thing. Down here it sports an advertisement for a 3-beam laser pickup. That was a big deal at the time. And then we have 20-step programming, which was also relatively common, but they decided to put it on the front anyway. Open and close for the CD. Pretty straightforward. Does exactly what it's supposed to do. Then you have a liquid crystal display, and as you can see, it's pretty dang simple. You put the disc in, it displays the time, it gives you the track number, and then it shows you the time ascending, and that's it. You don't have any way to manipulate the time to show remaining or anything like that. But like I said, that was the point of the machine, was to try and get the price down a little bit, make this more available to a mid-market. CD players at that time were not cheap, and many articles were written about CD players, so this was a competition between manufacturers to build the best CD player for the least price. And this was Sharp's strategy. So this is pretty simple stuff here. You're not going to see a whole lot. And then down here we have the buttons, open and close. This is the repeat button. It's pretty simple. Call and memory are for programming. Stop. And then we have the buttons for up and down and seek. And what's interesting about those buttons is they don't work like it does on other CD players. So if I seek a track here, and by the way, what you're going to hear is some pretty horrible sounding music, because I needed to find something that wouldn't trip YouTube's copyright. So if I go to track 2, and if I hit pause, it'll go and pause, and it'll wait like a CD player like you think it should. So it's going to blink until it gets itself synced up. Okay, so now we're playing the track, and if I hit one of these buttons again, then it'll go to the next track. That's pretty normal. But holding it down won't make it go into seek mode. What you have to do for that is put it in pause, and then you do that, and see it keeps seeking until you hit pause again. And you have to hit play again. And that's how it works. So it takes a little bit of getting used to. Now that works like that except when you are running stuff out of the programmed memory. Then it acts the way you think it ought to. You can have it in pause and then you can go to the next track. But in pause right now, it will do the seek function until you stop it. It'll go through the whole disc that way. So that takes a little bit of getting used to. But like I said, just for a CD player, it's pretty awesome. I think I just took a picture, which I didn't want to do. So anyway, this CD player, it's very basic, single disc. It sounds very good. I was very surprised at how good it actually sounded. And I don't know, like I said, I don't know what the chip is. I don't know whether these are analog filters or digital filters. At that time, there are references to both in Sharp CD players. I just don't have the information. You can buy a manual online. Somebody will send you a printed reproduction, but I'm not really that interested. It's just, this is a toy and it's just for fun. This will play CDRs. A lot of these CD players from the 80s, before the advent of CDR, will play CDRs. They have to be what are known as Redbook standard, which means that they are audio CDs that have been finalized. And if it's a good quality CDR like Maxell or something like that, one of the music grade ones, you shouldn't have any issues playing them back at all. This will not, of course, play back CDs with MP3 files on it or CDRWs. They weren't made to read it, and that was unanticipated technology at the time. But regular CDRs were meant to be backwardsly compatible and work in any CD player, and they do. And one of the curious things about this machine is the fact that this would have been one of the first that has the little cutout in the tray for the 3-inch CDs, because they were brand new at that time. I remember first reading about those in early 1988, and this was built in July. So this would have been one of the first that accommodated that. Before that, if you bought any 3-inch CDs, you would have to put this little adapter around them to get them to work in most CD players, unless it was a top-loading CD player, and then it doesn't matter, because then you just put it on the spindle. But this one has that little cutout. You can put the disc in, and that one is actually a 3-inch CDR, so I put that in there to show you that, yes, it will read it, and maybe I can get away with playing 2 seconds of audio from it just to prove that it'll play. Let's go ahead and play track 2, why not? Yep, so it plays just fine. No problem whatsoever with that. Really fun, good sounding little machine, and it'll track anything. I have some CDRs that I know have very high block error rates, and so what I think is going on with this is that it really concentrates on tracking the discs as best as possible with that 3-beam system. And then they have really good error correction before it even gets to the DAC. And at that time, that was an issue that people were talking about in CD players. And this is a second-generation CD player. And so therefore they would have been addressing those issues, because early CD players were relatively expensive. They sounded okay, but the problem was that they skipped. That was an issue. And CDs, of course, were promised to be like, you could, take a nail and scratch them and they'd still play. So that was a problem. So the next generation in the later 80s there, that was one of the things they were working on. And having a 3-beam system, that was a big deal. Got this plugged in with the JVC A3 amplifier from 1979, and down here is my reference CD player. This is a TEAC AD500 CD cassette combo. This is before TEAC cheapened out. The later versions of the TEAC CD players that I have looked at, and I have looked at them, they get very bad reviews, so probably be the last TEAC that I buy right there. And so there you go. I just thought you guys would enjoy that. I love playing around with CD players. I still maintain a collection, and I am collecting more because I have been kind of building up my collection from the mid-90s as far as country music is concerned, and most of that is on CD. And so, yep, still a big believer in the format. You can keep your little streaming wave file FLACs and MP3s that can be taken away from you at any time. And then, of course, hard drives crash. But some of these CDs I've had for 30 years, man, and they play just fine. So that means my kids are going to have a big mess to clean up when I die. So, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. We'll do it again soon.